Good afternoon and welcome to the Committee for Justice's virtual panel discussion, the Supreme Court and the 2020 election. I'm your host, Ashley Baker, and I am the Director of Public Policy at the Committee for Justice. I will now introduce the panelists in the order in which they will speak. Curt Levey is President of the Committee for Justice and is a veteran of Supreme Court confirmation battles. After graduating Harvard Law School with honors in clerking for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, Mr. Levey served as Director of Legal and Public Affairs at the Center for Individual Rights. There, he worked on landmark Supreme Court cases, including the University of Michigan affirmative action cases and the successful constitutional challenge to the Violence Against Women Act. After the Center for Individual Rights, Levey headed the Title IX policy group at the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. Levey is also a longtime member of the Federal Society's Civil Rights Executive Committee. Before attending law school, Mr. Levey earned undergraduate and graduate degrees in computer science from Brown University and worked in the field of artificial intelligence. He invented a new type of AI technology for which he wrote a successful patent application. Michael Thielen has served as the Republican National Lawyers Association's executive director since 2000. He graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles and Pepperdine School of Law. Michael worked previously for the Republican National Committee, RNC, and Judicial Watch. He has been actively involved in the judicial confirmation fight since 2001. He has been quoted in a wide range of conservative publications, including the Wall Street Journal and Washington Times. He is a frequent contributor to the Daily Caller. The RNLH Twitter's blog and Facebook account primarily focus on judges and election law. Carrie Severino is the president of the Judicial Crisis Network and co-author with Molly Hemingway of the best-selling book, Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Court. As an expert in the confirmation process, Mrs. Severino has been extensively quoted in the media and regularly appears on television, including MSNBC, Fox, CNN, C-SPAN, ABC's The Week. During the Kavanaugh confirmation alone, she logged 104 TV appearances, in addition to doing extensive radio and print media. Severino writes and speaks on a wide range of judicial issues, including the constitutional limits on government, the federal nomination process, and state judicial selection. She has testified before Congress on constitutional questions and briefed senators on judicial nominations, and regularly files briefs in high-profile Supreme Court cases. She was a law clerk to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and to Judge David B. Santel of the U.S. Court of Appeals of the D.C. Circuit and is a graduate of Harvard Law School. The brief presentations by our panelists will be followed by a discussion, after which we will open up the floor for audience Q&A. If you have a question that you would like to go ahead and ask, I'm keeping the written Q&A function that you see at the bottom of the screen on Zoom open, so you can actually send me questions during the panel, and I will get to them at the end of the presentations and the discussion, and go ahead and queue those up first and ask those to the panelists for you. So that's the second option if you don't want to answer one. If you don't ask a question whenever I open up the floor.
Thank you to CFJ for having me on today. Sure. I'm going to address my remarks to the process of confirming judges and how that's impacted elections in the past and could impact the 2020 election. While COVID-19 is maybe the issue of the 2020 campaign, the two candidates are possibly the best representatives of the respective camps on judges as a campaign issue. Democrat nominee Joe Biden as a senator forever changed the confirmation process for judges in the Senate. Meanwhile, then candidate Trump, by making the unprecedented announcement before the 2016 of a list from which he would select potential Supreme Court nominees, arguably elevated the judicial issue to another level as well. But this story really starts in 1987 with Senator Joe Biden as chairman of the Judiciary Committee and the confirmation hearing of Judge Robert Bork. Prior to that hearing, confirmation hearings were rather boring affairs. Truth, they didn't even start holding hearings till the early 20th century. But it was not the substance of the Bork hearing that was the issue. Led by Biden, Senate Democrats portrayed Bork as this fascist figure that was going to destroy the fabric of America. And they looked literally everywhere to find evidence to back up their claims. They did not find any, and it was not for lack of looking. They even did such things as look into his video rental records to try to find an issue to nail him with. On the other side, the right wasn't ready for this fight. They knew Judge Bork was a legal giant, a heavyweight, and Supreme Court fights were unheard of. As a result of Biden's leadership, two things happened. First, and most importantly, Judge Bork was defeated. But second, a new verb was created, to bork. As Webster's defines it, to attack or defeat a nominee or candidate for public office unfairly through an organized campaign of harsh, public criticism, or vilification. The effects of borking are still around to this day, even though we are now winning the judicial confirmation battles generally. Carrie's the expert on this, but in a sense, Biden helped develop the playbook that was used in Justice Brett Kavanaugh. The Biden-led Senate Judiciary Committee tried to raise doubts about Justice Clarence Thomas and failed during the normal hearing process. I'll add as a bit of an aside, if you have time to go back and watch the old videos, Biden talking about natural law is an unintentional comedy. He really gets lost, and it's pretty obvious he doesn't have a clue of what he was talking about. But more importantly for this discussion, he couldn't get, or the Democrats couldn't nail Justice Thomas. So what'd they do? Well, as we've seen with Kavanaugh, they went to a completely bogus and discredited allegation by the FBI after the hearing was over, and they brought in a woman, in this case, Anita Hill. The hearing became a circus. It was the top of the news every night. And the playbook that Biden invented was used years later against Kavanaugh. So in a really, very real sense, Biden started the ugliness we have on judicial confirmations in a very real way, made them a top issue in politics. Now I'd like to jump ahead a little bit to when I started in this game in 2001. And 2001 was an important year in judicial confirmations because that was the year the Democrats decided to make it more than just about the Supreme Court. They started to bork circuit court nominees. Once again, in 2001, Republicans were caught flat-footed because you don't filibuster a Miguel Estrada, you don't filibuster a circuit court nominee. That kind of action is saved for Supreme Court nominees. So it became an issue then going forward in all the presidential elections, not just the Supreme Court, but the circuit courts. In 2004, as Curt was well aware, President Bush had his number one applause line was national security was the top issue. Number two was judges. The base really loved it when he talked about judges. But a better example of how the judge issue started to play for the non-Supreme Court level is John Thune. John Thune in 2002 ran against Senator Tim Johnson. Now, most of you probably don't remember Senator Tim Johnson, and there's a good reason for that. He was not very charismatic. He didn't accomplish much. He was a definition of a backbench senator. But he beat narrowly Senator Thune, who's a very charismatic figure. Thune decided to run again in 2004. Now, 2004, he was running against Senator Daschle, who was a charismatic figure, was well-funded. He was a Senate minority leader. Senator Thune beat Senator Daschle. And the reason he beat Senator Daschle, according to Senator Thune, was he was able to use Senator Daschle's filibusters and attacks on President Bush's judicial nominees to help him win that election narrowly. So every year since then, judicial nominations have been an issue in Senate and presidential races. Now, President Trump used it, of course, in a very different way. I'll tell you, in 2016, as the executive director of the Republican National Lawyers Association, a lot of our members were very nervous. There was a lot of trepidation about then candidate Trump. How would he govern? Would he be a conservative? At our 2016 policy conference, Senator Cruz had just suspended his campaign, so Trump had just wrapped up the nomination. One of the people addressing that conference was Don McGahn, who was then Trump's campaign counsel and later became White House counsel. He told us about this list of judges that Trump was going to release for the Supreme Court for Scalia's vacant seat. This was a great idea and a great thing because it reassured the fears of many on the Republican establishment and the right that Trump was going to govern as a conservative. And obviously he came through in a big way. But I want to jump now to 2018. 2018 was a very bad year electorally for Republicans. And we were at risk of losing the Senate. Democrats groundlessly attacked Justice Kavanaugh, as you all know, and that changed the dynamic. While it was still a wave election and Pelosi became Speaker of the House, the Democrats overachieved in the House, they underachieved in the Senate, and Republicans actually picked up seats. A good example was Senator Donnelly of Indiana. Before the Kavanaugh hearing, he was looking like a shoo-in to win re-election. When he voted against Kavanaugh and opposed Kavanaugh, he lost. Sorry, my computer had an issue there. Marsha Blackburn. Marsha Blackburn was narrowly losing or in a dead heat race with a popular moderate Democrat, Phil Breslin. Now, Breslin came out for Kavanaugh, but it didn't make a difference. Voters in Tennessee saw that this was going to be a problem with the Democrats, and they overwhelmingly, Blackburn ended up winning by 11 points, voted on this issue because of Kavanaugh. In a sense, it made all the Republicans come home. So it's been a good issue for us historically, which brings us to 2020. Before I get started on how it will play out for Biden and Trump, I do want to note some of the weird things that happened in 2020, mainly Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete came to prominence in part because this goofy idea of court packing, which is now gained some credence on the far left, even though it was basically dismissed after Roosevelt tried it in the 30s. Mayor Pete's goofy, obviously Mayor Pete didn't win, but it shows the Democrats are engaged on this issue to some extent. Also, it's worth noting Amy Klobuchar. Klobuchar was attacked as being too moderate and too nice to Trump for supporting a small percentage of his nominees, but more than, say, Bernie Sanders supported. So Klobuchar is rumored to be the front runner to be the vice presidential nominee right now. But if she is picked, the Sanders types will not be happy with her on the judge issue because she's been too nice to Trump. But more importantly, the issue is going to come down to Trump and Biden. For Biden, his history is going to come back and haunt him for completely different reasons. The right and the left both hate or dislike the way Senator Biden handled Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearing. The middle also is going to be upset with Biden because Biden can't articulate himself well on this issue because all his issue, he's been on both sides of the issue on various times. So he'll look weak to the left, confuse the middle, and quite frankly, evil to the right. Now, President Trump, on the other hand, I can say without reservation, he's been the best president on the issue of judges in my 25 years in Washington, bar none. It's not just the Supreme Court level, but it's the other judges that he's done a great job on. Remember in 2001, President Bush was not ready for the attacks, most notably the filibusters on lower court nominees. This is even though he tried to play nice and nominated Clinton nominee, failed Clinton nominee, I should say, Ronnie White as his first pick. The results were a large number of vacancies at the end of his first term. President Obama did not make judges a priority either for a different reason. Supposedly he told the liberal base, I gave you Kagan, I gave you Sotomayor, it's time for other things. President Trump, when he started, thanked President Obama for leaving him so many vacancies, and he's filled those vacancies. Carrie will give you the numbers and more details, but he's filled virtually, or will fill, I should say, virtually every circuit court nomination at the end of his first term. Now, you put that in context. This is a Congress that can't pass a budget, that governs by continuing resolution, yet we're going to confirm every possible judicial nominee. That's a huge win by the Senate and McConnell and Grassley and Graham and President Trump. That means the judge issue for President Trump in 2020 is a home run. For Senator Biden, it's a minefield based on his histories and his efforts to appease the far left of the party. Ashley, I think I'll turn it over back to Carrie. I can talk about elections in the Supreme Court, but I'll wait if you want on that.
Actually, it seems like Curt's Wi-Fi might be working. It seems like maybe he's filibustered by his Wi-Fi for a few minutes there. So Curt, let's see. Are you good to go now?
Let's hope for the best. I apologize for the delays on my end. I was just giving an overview, and of course, number one question is, how big will the Supreme Court issue be this time around? We know it'll be big because it's been big in all the modern presidential elections, but will it be as big as when, as Mike pointed out, we had the Scalia vacancy and Trump's list? And if it is big, or even if it's small, is going to help Trump again? I think so, because, it's the one thing that Republican never-Trumpers like about him. Now, I was about to say that, or I did say that unlike 2016, there'll be no vacancy this fall. And
Curt, I think that's a good point for Carrie to pick up on. You're having a little bit of a feedback issue. Curt?
Ginsburg being 87 and Breyer 81, there's always the chance of an illness-related vacancy.
Curt, we can't quite hear what you're saying.
So, let me quickly think
Curt,
about what would happen if there was a vacancy. And
Carrie, if you could, if
I'm
you
having
could
a what issue now?
No,
okay.
no, Curt, you're having some technical issues. If Carrie can pick it up from here,
I will
rejoin the meeting.
There we go. Okay, I will try logging out.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Curt. And to kind of pick up a little bit on where he left off, yeah, I absolutely agree with what Michael was saying, the significance of the of judges in the last election, and with Curt was starting to talk about how that's going to carry on into this election currently. I'll add, going on to Michael's comments on how amusing it is to watch Joe Biden attempting to question Clarence Thomas about natural law. If you want to see that all play out in its glorious comedy, the documentary created equal about Justice Thomas, which is Justice Thomas, in his own words, based on 30 hours of interviews with him, is actually going to be coming to PBS in May. I think it's May 18th. And there's a wonderful exchange where you have the justice kind of deadpanning, going, you know, the hardest thing about these hearings is talking to someone who clearly has no idea what they're talking about and trying to look like respectful and attentive. And you can just see that look on his face as he's looking at Joe Biden, who has no idea what he's talking about. So, you know, tune in May 18th for a review. And I think, again, that plays into some of Biden's weaknesses on this area. I'll add that, you know, if you look at some of the stuff that's going on the left with regard to what do we do with judges, they don't seem to be entirely at ease or understanding a unified message themselves. You have groups on the left like Demand Justice, some of the well-funded activist groups who think we need to make judges huge. We need to make this the biggest issue and get Democrats talking about this. And then you had the wannabe nominees who were running as fast as humanly possible from this issue. So the nominees, the candidates themselves, seem to sense that this is an issue that is very fraught for Democrats. I think partly because you have those the big money interests in the left that are trying to push them further and further to the left on this, along with so many other issues. So, for example, look at the group of judges that Demand Justice put out, kind of their best, the only counter we've seen in the left to Trump's list of judges. His list of potential Supreme Court nominees was replete with people who had a long history on the federal bench, in the state Supreme Courts, who had amazing resumes, not just as lawyers, obviously, but as judges. So you knew what their approach to the law was and how they would approach things as a judge. The list that Demand Justice put together was, first of all, not short. It was 32 judges, or 32 would-be judges long. But the funny part is it wasn't even judges. There were only 8 of those 32 that even had judicial experience. They clearly were not looking for someone who has a judicial philosophy that has been well articulated and tried on the bench. They were looking for people, and you can see this by their list, that fit different demographic groups and that fit different interest groups within the left coalition. It is a very difficult, that's a very difficult way to run as a president, saying, oh, I'm going to give you a judge that's going to fill this interest group interest, not I want judges, which I think is what the American people want, and this is what Trump has articulated, judges that are going to be faithful to the rule of law, faithful to the Constitution as it was originally written, faithful to the laws as they had been passed. The actual text of the law is not what I wish they would have been or what I think they should be in a perfect world. So that's the kind of judges we've seen Trump talk about. On the left, they don't seem to want those kind of judges, but I think it's hard for them to say that, because if they acknowledge they want judges who are going to be faithful to the law, they're going to get the left wing of the party very angry. But if they acknowledge how radical and how extreme of judges would make those people happy, they're not going to be able to win the vast majority of Americans. That's why we haven't seen them talking about it as much. So talking about some of the other ways this is going to impact, potentially impact the election, we are going to see some cases coming out this June that are on hot button issues. I think you're going to typically, what we've seen is an increasing level of threats and intimidation by the left against the courts, including in some of these cases. For example, the Second Amendment case that was argued last December, where you had people like Senator Whitehouse and some of his fellow senators issuing an amicus brief that effectively threatened that if the court did not come down in a conclusion that they agreed with, that they would consider legislation to pack the court, going back to Mayor Pete's idea back there, something that even Justice Ginsburg acknowledged was a failure when FDR tried it and should not be attempted again. So you have people trying to threaten the court at every turn. I think you're going to see that. Look, every term there are some cases that come out 5-4. You're going to see the same usual suspects out there saying, well, this is just evidence that the court is only a bunch of right-wing hacks. We know that's not true if you just look at the objective numbers. Justice Sotomayor even made a suggestion of that effect, like why do my colleagues on the right vote in lockstep without considering the fact that, in fact, the people who vote the most in lockstep on the court are actually the 4 liberals. There are a lot of instances you can point to where each of the conservative justices in the court votes with the 4 liberals because they don't have a single view of the Constitution. They approach it from a similar approach of originalism generally, but that sometimes, depending on the case, there might be some idiosyncrasy in how they look at it. The liberals have much less of that. They do tend to vote in lockstep, and I think that's because their judicial philosophy really invites bringing your political approach into the conference room and the chambers a little bit in terms of how you're interpreting the law. That's a dangerous thing. So whether we see, however we see the court come down on these issues, from guns to abortion to religious freedom, some of which are going to be argued as late as May this year. So maybe, I don't know if we'll see them be able to get the decisions out by the end of June for that last set of cases. Maybe we'll have to push it. It is something that will be fresh on the American people's mind. But I think at the end of the day, what's been so successful for Trump so far, and I think will continue to be, is the fact that the American people doesn't want to see judges that are going to be simply bringing a political approach to the bench. And if you look at Trump's nominees, they really characterize people who are faithful to the law itself. I remember talking last fall to a recent Trump appointee who said, I'm loving the job, but one of the things that I get frustrated about is there's a lot of really horrible laws out there, and I just have to keep on applying them as they're written. And oftentimes that leads to results that I know are bad results, but that's what the results compelled by the law. That is the best thing to hear a judge say. That's what you want. You want a judge who recognizes that the fault of the decision coming out in a way that seems like it's not what maybe we'd all want to see is because the law is written badly, and it's not his or her job to change the law. That puts the ball back in Congress's court and gives them the opportunity to edit that and change that. There's so many great men and women that Trump has put in the court, and we're already starting to see a shift in a lot of the courts, several of them that have shifted from Democrat to Republican appointed majorities. That's exciting. And others like the Ninth Circuit that have shifted from ultra radical, the Ninth Circus, it has been called, really crazy courts, to actually a place where you can, from time to time, get the law applied even-handedly, and you can't just simply say, well, I brought the case in the Ninth Circuit, therefore the liberal side is going to win here. That's wonderful news for America, and the focus that he has put on this, I think, is a great shift from what we've seen from many previous presidents, as Michael was kind of pointing out, where they didn't acknowledge the significance of the long-term impact of judges. So with that, I'll turn it back to Curt if his computer's back on, or Ashley, either way.
Curt, let's give that another shot.
Let's give it another shot. I don't know if it's any better now. I was just speculating about, what if there was a vacancy, before the end of this term. Would McConnell push ahead with confirmation, even though?
Why don't you try turning off your video and just turning it on audio?
Garland was not processed. Would he be able to keep?
Curt, please turn off your video and try turning on audio. Maybe that'll help you.
Just on audio. I will try that. So skip video. I'll try to skip it. Yep. Is that any better?
That is much better.
If there was a vacancy before the election, would senators rush back? Okay. So would senators rush back to D.C. despite, the risks of COVID-19? That would really have a big impact on the election if there was a struggle over a Supreme Court nomination before the election. I mean, a lot of those questions depend on who Trump would nominate. Would he have to nominate a moderate, given that there's no time for a do-over? If whoever he appoints gets rejected or has some sort of scandal. And that brings us to the next big question about who Trump or Biden would nominate if they win the election. Given Ginsburg's age, there's likely to be at least one vacancy in the next 4 years. Ginsburg's the Energizer Bunny, but I mean, can she go forever? Breyer's 81. Even Thomas and Alito are no spring chickens at 71 and 70. An interesting question is, will the nominee be different if Breyer or a GOP appointee leaves the court instead of Ginsburg? Another interesting question is, will Biden release a list? Given how much success Trump had with it. will Trump release a new list or at least update his old one? And then there's another set of questions surrounding big decisions the court will issue at the end of this term. I think Carrie might have talked about it briefly, but there's a higher than unusual number of hot button cultural issues that are going to be decided in late June, or who knows, it may go into July, so right before the election. So that means there's going to be a bunch of decisions that could well become campaign issues. I mean, we have the DACA/immigration case, the Louisiana abortion case, the New York gun case, the LGBT discrimination cases, a couple of religious liberty cases, one involving a Montana student aid program, another a religious exemption for contraception coverage, the Trump records cases that'll be argued next month, that those are equally controversial. I mean, if the Supreme Court winds up upholding the subpoenas for the records, what those records contain could also affect the election. The faithless elector case could affect the election most directly of all these cases, if the electoral vote winds up being as close as in, say, 2000. I had thought COVID-19 might kick some of these decisions past the election because I thought the oral arguments wouldn't be able to fall, but all of those hot button cases will be argued next month. And then, talking about cases that could directly affect the election, just last week, the Supreme Court decided to dispute Wisconsin's election. It rejected an extension for absentee ballots due to the virus. And now virtually every state is going to have, disputes next fall because they're going to adjust their voting procedures one way or another to account for the virus. The Supreme Court may get involved in a number of those disputes. And, each such case could turn into a campaign issue as well as directly affecting the voting. I guess lastly, the focus of this panel is the Supreme Court, but I think we should acknowledge the lower courts will play some role in the election too. Again, voters are most focused on the Supreme Court, but Republican voters are likely to give Trump credit for the great job that he's done on circuit nominees, which some of my colleagues mentioned. On the other hand, Biden and his surrogates will warn that Trump is packing the lower courts. There's not much Biden can do initially if he gets elected because there's almost no circuit vacancies. But, then again, there may be a big pent-up demand by Democrat appointees on the circuit courts to retire as soon as a Democratic president is elected. So anyway, those are just some of the issues. I don't have time to answer them all, but I think that's fascinating how many issues there are involving the Supreme Court in the election.
Yeah, so now let's get kind of more into the discussion part of the panel. I think it'd be great to hear a little bit more also about the lower courts, about how, any of those upcoming fights could potentially, affect the election if we don't have a vacancy. There are a few big vacancies up, especially in the DC circuit, with the Walker nomination recently is one, for example. And also just like any large, confirmations we have, we hear a lot about Kavanaugh, but we don't hear as much, in retrospect about, the Rowell confirmation, all the other ones that have been considered pretty significant. And also, any decisions that have come out of those circuits that we've either flipped or we've kind of, came close to flipping or evened out a bit. We can just hear a bit more about that for starters would be great. Yeah,
do you want you to jump in
I'll
here?
jump in, Carrie, then you can finish up, because I just want to say really quickly about Judge Walker. If anybody has the time, you should read his decision on the Louisville mayor case, or his order, I should say. It's really basically, in a nutshell, they were trying to stop drive-in church, and Walker wrote a brilliant decision, both legally, and it's a fun read that makes the point that, if you can go to a drive-up liquor store, you should be able to go to a drive-up church. And I think the mood of the country is changing right now, as we see in Michigan and some of the other swing states. And he didn't obviously do it for political reasons, but it's a very good decision, and very timely and interesting decision for non-legal nerds too, because he does make some really great points about the First Amendment in there. And Walker is going to be a big fight from the left side, because the left, he was rated unanimously, or he was rated not qualified by the ABA, but it was more of a asterisk situation, as Carrie can go into more detail on, because he didn't have the requisite 12 years of experience. I think Walker's a real rock star, and he's a guy that will be fun to fight for. I don't know, Curt, if it'll rise to the level that the public is paying attention to it, but to the extent they do, it's a win for us, because that decision alone is one that everybody can understand. You don't have to be a lawyer, and everybody's going to be on Judge Walker's side.
Yeah, I think a big part is perception. Any president only slowly transforms the circuit courts, and a few circuits have flipped under Trump. It would really take another 4 years to flip a bunch of them and have an enormous impact, despite the fact that about 50 circuit court nominees have been confirmed under Trump. But the perception, if you listen to the rhetoric on the left, you would think that Trump had pretty much replaced everyone on the circuit and lower courts, i.e. hundreds of judges, with right-wing ideologues. And just that perception on the left, I think, is going to make it an issue. But, in some sense, Republican appointees don't transform things as much as Democratic appointees, because, as Carrie alluded to, Republican appointees are, for the most part, textualists. So they go where the law tells them to go, and sometimes that's, results in a liberal outcome, where Democratic appointees believe more in the living Constitution and living statutes, and so pretty much all the outcomes come out in a liberal way when they're in control. So in a sense, we have a disadvantage there. We have a philosophical advantage, but a practical disadvantage.
Well, I have to say, I think to a certain extent, the left is right when they're talking about Trump's overwhelming success in the appellate courts. Because, I would love to see 4 more years to continue to fill these courts. If you look, we've got 2 appellate vacancies left. We have completely cleared the bench on any appellate judges waiting to be confirmed. And he already has put on the court in 4 years almost as many judges as appellate judges as Obama did in 8 years. So that is a huge, huge impact. And while I agree, they're not going to go on the courts and just say, well, here, we're hereby enacting every conservative policy goal. I think that having them there doing a fair, even-handed job is itself such a strong message. It's watching and realizing that these aren't people who are, this actually is a philosophy that is going to be even-handed in its approach to the law, that is going to be fair. I think you're going to at least, you're going to have the talking heads on the left and the crazy people like the Senator White Houses of the world who can continue to be convinced that this is all a political game. However, I think the people who are the actual litigants are going to be able to realize that you can make, this is a recognized judicial philosophy. You can make arguments that appeal to it. You're starting to see that shift already at the Supreme Court, where on both sides of the aisle now, people are having to appeal to the text of the law, the text of what the Constitution actually says, the history of how it was understood when that whatever provision they're looking at was actually ratified. That's great. We're starting to see everyone on both sides of the aisle agreeing this is a valid interpretive philosophy. And so I think you're going to see a big sea change in how the courts run. Already we're starting to see that, and that's a great thing. I agree with Michael. Justin Walker is going to be a rock star on the DC circuit, and he and Judge Wilson, who was appointed to the Fifth Circuit seat, I think we're seeing a real priority put on leaving no vacancy behind, as Leader McConnell has said. We're going to get these judges done by the end of the year. I think it's going to be, it's really important. And just one more comment I don't, who knows whether we'll see a vacancy on the Supreme Court by the end of this year, but I think this goes for other vacancies as well. The speculation, well, does this, so close to an election year, does this mean you have to appoint a quote moderate to these seats because you can't afford to have a big fight? Look, whoever Trump appoints to anything, to dog catcher, he will get a big fight right now. It is an election year, and it doesn't matter if the person has the cleanest background on history. That was part of the motivating factor to choose Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court, because he had been looked at in depth so many times by the FBI. It's like, this guy is as clean as a whistle. We know they've got nothing on him. And you can invent stories about anyone, regardless of how completely clean their background is. So that I think it would be a mistake to say, well, let's try to put up a moderate or compromise candidate. We have seen historically what that means. If either you are committed to the text of an original understanding of the Constitution, or you are, basically in play and up to the highest bidder sometimes. And I think that's not a direction we want to go. On top of which, we have seen that Democrats certainly don't play that way themselves. There's no way that you get a compromise candidate who's sort of a textualist or sort of an originalist out of a Democratic president. And ultimately, at the end of the day, both the president, the senators have all taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. You can't, in good faith, carry out that oath while putting someone on the Supreme Court or on any federal court that you can't be confident is going to interpret the federal laws and the Constitution as they're written.
When Carrie was saying we're all textualists now, it made me wonder, is Biden going to say that now that he's appealed to the mainstream? Will he say that he'll appoint textualist judges, or given how beholden he is to the left-leaning base, will he just come right out and pretty much admit that he's going to appoint someone who believes in the living Constitution? I don't know the answer. I don't even know if Biden's going to show up for the debates. Maybe he'll use the virus as an excuse and avoid them. But at some point, he's probably going to have to answer a question about what kind of judges he'll appoint. For Trump, we already know the answer.
So we have one question via the chat. I'm going to go ahead and incorporate that since it's relevant to what we're discussing right now. It's from Randy May. He asked, if Congress does not adjourn formally but does not meet in session to consider judicial nominations, should President Trump try to use recess appointments to fill any vacant slots, say for Justin Walker? Although obviously not ideal, recess appointments have been used in the past to fill judicial vacancies.
Well, I mean, Trump hinted, was it just yesterday, that he might use his constitutional power to adjourn Congress. And I noticed that most of his critics jumped in and said, no president has ever done that. They didn't say he doesn't have the constitutional power to do so. But there would be a huge constitutional fight, and, I don't know who would win.
As a practical matter, I don't think that's necessarily a good idea for judges, because they would not, it happened with Pickering under George W. Bush, and he was only allowed to serve a brief period and then he had to get out. So it's not like it's for life. So it's much more useful to use recess appointments for cabinet positions or administration positions where you're not there for life. For judges, I think, as Carrie's pointing out, this is a good fight for us to have. I think we win and then they're there forever, well, for their lifetimes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as Carrie's pointing out, we only have so many vacancies left anyway. So as a practical matter, we can only do so much in such a situation.
It's really exciting, actually. I mean, especially since the Senate is now on a little bit of an extended break, and we don't know how easy it's going to be to get things done coming back, at least until we can have some opening up after the peak of this pandemic has passed. It's really exciting that at least before this, we had made such progress. I mean, for a long time during Trump's presidency, the number of vacancies was just ballooning. We got up to 182 vacancies, I think, at its peak at one point. And now we're down into the 80s again, not the 180s, the actual 80s. And that's a very good thing. So starting into this at some of the lowest levels that Trump has had during his presidency is a relief, because it does slow down the process, at least somewhat. Although I know there's some creative things being worked through in terms of how can we have at least judicial hearings and things from a distance.
Right. So just as a reminder, the Q&A is open. So as the webinar chat, you can post your questions through either, and we'll continue the discussion till we see another question.
Yeah. If
I was just going to add that, go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, no, because just Michael brought it up about Judge Walker's ABA rating, because I think that's one that the left is going to try to, and they've tried to do this on several occasions with Trump's nominees. The ABA is an organization, an institution that has long had and continues to have a very clear, liberal, perspective and bias toward it. They've tried to segregate off their judicial nominations group, saying this is a neutral group, but unfortunately, actual empirical studies have been done showing they are biased against conservatives. They're biased against women. They're biased against minorities. And what's really disturbing is how they continue to not have learned from this and keep going. We saw with Judge Van Dyke, a Ninth Circuit judge's nomination earlier this year, when there was a very unfair analysis of him, kind of putting words in his mouth, saying that he wouldn't treat LGBT litigants fairly, which is not at all what he said, not taking seriously people who defended him, and rather kind of drawing out a narrative from some of his own personal and political opponents, was really striking. And we've seen that also with things like Judge Walker's own evaluation. And they've done this with a few of Trump's nominees, where they said, oh, I'm sorry, we have an objective number of years of experience you need. We simply can't give you qualified if you have fewer than those years of experience. Well, that would be one thing if they actually did have a consistent standard they held to. They have a published standard, but unfortunately there are many instances where they have abandoned those apparently objective numbers in order to give qualified and well-qualified ratings to liberal nominees. So even the parts of their evaluation that often can be presented as just neutral, numerically based, are not applied fairly across the standard. So if they're willing to give well-qualified, for example, to Goodwin Liu, who was a Ninth Circuit nominee of Obama's, who had not even been out of law school for long enough to have served the 12 years requisite experience, it's shocking that they won't do the same for Judge Walker, who himself also had a very distinguished legal career before his time at the district bench and now on the DC circuit.
Yeah, and I like Carrie's point about they don't seem to learn. They could get away with being somewhat biased if they were subtle about it. But then, every year or so, they have one of these just outrageous evaluations that reminds everyone of just how biased they are. So if they were smart, they would learn to just be subtly biased, as they've been for all these decades. I also wanted to say that, there is no doubt, as Carrie pointed out, that COVID-19 will slow down the process a bit. But thankfully, McConnell has already made it clear that he's going to keep confirming through the end of, not only through the election, but through the end of this Congress. There's not a lot the Democrats can do about it now that, since 2013, they killed the judicial filibuster. And I know they're going to scream about the Thurmond rule, the Leahy rule, whatever you want to call it, that there's sort of an end point. But you know what? That end point can't apply when you've missed several months due to COVID-19.
And Mike, why don't you, since you have a lot of experience in election law, why don't you chime in a little bit on election law and the court?
Yeah, I know that's kind of a hot topic right now after Wisconsin last week. I just want to make a couple quick points in this, and I know Curt mentioned it in his remarks too. First of all, the court is not good at reacting to election controversies. So election controversies require quick responses. And Bush v. Gore is a good example. It's an important decision, but it's not a high point of legal reasoning in that they had, some time to respond. So the courts are going to be reluctant to get involved, I should say. Second, I don't think Supreme Court justices like to be called Republican or Democrat. They want to be above partisan labels in politics. Election controversies are by their nature political. So I don't really expect the Supreme Court to get very much involved in the vote by mail or ballot harvesting cases coming up. I think they'll stay out of those for the most part. Now, obviously they were just involved in Wisconsin, and Mark Elias will have you believe that's a big win for the Democrats, but the reality is the Democrats lost in every way, but it was a narrow decision. The district court judge in the Wisconsin case rewrote the election law to allow absentee ballots to count after the election day. And by count, I mean be voted and sent in after election day. That's never been allowed. So it was so outrageous, the Supreme Court had to get in. And the Supreme Court actually said, let me quote it here, extending the date by which ballots may be cast by voters, not just received by the municipal clerks, but cast by voters for an additional 6 days after the scheduled election day fundamentally alters the nature of the election. By changing the election rules so close to the election date, and by affording relief that the plaintiffs themselves did not ask for in their preliminary injunction motion, the district court contravenes the court's precedents and erred by ordering such relief. The court has repeatedly emphasized that lower courts should not should ordinarily not alter the election rules in an even election. This is about the Purcell case, which basically says courts stay out of elections when close to election day. So I don't think the courts are going to be that involved in the madness that's going to come. There's going to be a bunch of cases, but I don't think it's going to rise to the Supreme Court level unless we have something incredible like Bush v. Gore. Because if they stayed out of Wisconsin, or if they stayed this concept in the middle of a pandemic, they're going to stay out of most election controversies coming up this fall. And don't get me wrong, Elias and company are going to make a lot of lawsuits, a lot of different places, but it's not going to be a matter for the Supreme Court to decide. Yeah,
I would agree and point out that part of the reason Wisconsin got decided the way it did is because it was so last minute, the courts were jumping in. We now, I mean, if anyone is waiting, and they were complaining that Wisconsin waited to the last minute too much. If there aren't states already thinking through their plans for November now, I really don't think courts are going to say, all right, now we're going to go in and rework your election law because we're so close to a November election in the middle of whatever level of epidemic, pandemic we have at that point. Everyone's on notice now, so hopefully they can straighten out ways to get absentee ballots out earlier, for example, to people, et cetera.
I'm going to disagree a little bit there. The lower courts have been very activist under Trump, even more activist than in the past. And while the Supreme Court might want to stay out, the lower courts are going to jump in, and there's going to be some very activist rulings. And I think that's just going to I think it'll be like Wisconsin, where the Supreme Court doesn't want to get involved, but the alternative is so outrageous that they have to.
You could be right, Curt, but Wisconsin, again, the court gave relief the plaintiff didn't even ask for. I mean, the court went pretty over the top there, and it took a number of things. And there's a couple rules in elections that everybody agrees on before that case, certainly, that you couldn't vote after election day. And I said you couldn't vote after election day. That's an outrageous concept, but that's what the district court said, that you could vote after the election was over, in a sense, by allowing it 6 days after the election. So that decision was so extreme and so outrageous, and also so last minute, as Carrie pointed out, the court felt they had to step in. So yeah, we could get extreme decisions like that, but I think now we got a run-up time to kind of figure things out. We know what's going on a bit. It's not as last second, hopefully. Hopefully things will be more resolved by November. So I don't think the court will be involved, but you could be right.
Okay, so we have a question. Well, we have a couple of questions, one of which I think was answered. First, what impact will judicial confirmations likely have on Senate elections this fall? Let's get to that first.
Yeah, so I mean, Michael can talk more about the specifics, but I'll just point out that I think he was absolutely right when he talked about the impact the Supreme Court had in 2018, which was exactly the opposite of what the Democrats thought when they were trying to push the Supreme Court nomination as close as possible to the election. They thought this is going to really help us, but it turned out they went so far overboard in their attacks on Judge Kavanaugh at the time that they actually pushed things the opposite direction. And as Mitch McConnell said, this is the best gift you could have given us. You did the get out the vote effort for us. So there's a potential for that same kind of thing happening again. I think it also just point out that this is something, anytime it's going to be a significant issue for the president, it's going to be something that trickles down to Senate voters as well. But I wasn't impressed when I was working with Molly, interviewing people for Justice on Trial, the number of different outside groups that we talked to when we said, when did you start getting involved in the Kavanaugh nomination? When were you first involved in that? And some of them said 2014. And they specifically pointed to that Senate election. They said, we were working at that point, not even knowing when the vacancy would come or who would fill it, that we knew we needed senators who were going to be ready to vote for some of those good nominees. That's part of the secret sauce to getting good judges. You have the president who's bold and knows the right kind of people to nominate. And thankfully, we really have that in Trump. But you also have to have a Senate that is willing to confirm them and not kind of hoping for the fly under the radar candidate, which, as we know from history, never turns out to be the solid originalist and textualist that you want to see on the court. So I think there are more really sophisticated judicial voters than people often give credit for, and that are realizing that the Senate votes are part of that formula as well.
Rove was fond of pointing out the degree to which the judges issue helped not just Bush get elected, but also to help Republicans win Senate seats. And I think it's for the same reason that the judges issue tends to help Republican presidents. It's that conservatives are the ones who really feel like they've been wronged by the courts. that, Democratic outcomes were overruled or prevented by the courts, and the left, for all its screaming about a conservative or far right majority on the court, there's not even really 5 solid conservatives right now on the court. So it's screaming, but they haven't really been robbed by the Supreme Court. And so I think as long as that remains the case, the GOP will be more motivated by the judges issue, whether it's the presidential election or Senate elections.
So we have 2 questions in the queue here, the first of which I think we have already gotten to. What do you think about Trump's assertion of adjourning Congress to a point recess? And the second question being, if Trump wins and a vacancy comes up on the Supreme Court, who do you prefer to be nominated? I, for one, would prefer any textualist judge, and I think that's what we'll get. But you guys can, chime in on what your thoughts are there.
Well, I mean, I think all of us would prefer a textualist, someone who interprets not just the Constitution according to the text, but also statutes. I think we'd also prefer someone who doesn't give too much deference to the regulatory state. But, as a practical matter, when you're talking about who someone like Trump will appoint, he will look for somebody who has all those principles, but doesn't have a track record that makes them too easy to attack. I mean, it's sad that, that too much of a track record these days counts against you. But as a practical matter, Trump will look for people where we're confident of their principles, but there's don't give the left as much to attack. I mean, I suppose Carrie would say they're going to try to vilify and destroy the person anyway. But I think, the thinking on our side is, let's not give them any more ammunition than necessary.
Well, I might disagree with you on that, Curt, because I think Trump has actually built a record of getting confirmed more people than any other president I could think of that were just these bold choices that you would have said in any previous Republican presidency, oh, that guy's too hot to handle. She would never get through because of what she said on this and other thing. I mean, think of Kyle Duncan, Fifth Circuit judge, who had worked for the state of Louisiana as their state solicitor general, defending their marriage laws, worked on abortion as an issue, worked on the Hobby Lobby case, all of which are these huge third rail issues. You're going, oh, nope, too hot to handle. Hello, he's sitting in a life seat on the Fifth Circuit. You've got Amy Coney, the dogma lives loudly, who obviously got a lot of pushback, was very outspoken in her beliefs beforehand, and still gets nominated. And I think you can go down a huge list of those. I think what's so exciting about the Trump presidency is some of those things that in a previous world would have gotten you blackballed and off the list actually are the qualifying factors to be on Trump's short list or to be on his list of potential appellate nominees, because that shows that you have the courage of your convictions. You're not going to be the kind of person who says, oh, I don't want to have to make this tough call because I know I'm going to get a bad op-ed in the New York Times. These are all people who've already had op-eds in the New York Times criticizing them, whether it was their stance on Obamacare or again on social issues or you name it. Lawrence Van Dyke, who I mentioned, who had been involved in a lot of environmental issues, people who had been involved in Second Amendment issues. That's the kind of thing that gets you into consideration in this presidency, because they know that this is someone who's not afraid to follow the law and the principles of the judicial approach where they lead, even if it means it's something that you might think is going to be a bad thing for your career. And I think that's really good news, because it means that they're going to carry that boldness onto the bench as well.
Okay,
and I do
one
agree
live
with Carrie.
question. I'm sorry, for 1 second, and then you can finish up your sentence, and then we have one live question.
I do agree with Carrie on the lower courts. I think, and it's not even just true of judicial appointments, it's true of executive appointments, where things that would have gotten you out of consideration under Bush can actually be pluses in the Trump administration. So I was limiting my remarks to Supreme Court nominees, and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are perfect examples. Great principles, but not too much in the way of a controversial track record. So my bad if I seemed like I was disagreeing there.
So we have one question from David Smith. I'm going to click the button, David, to allow you to talk and ask your question live, because he did the raise hand function. So allow David to talk for a sec. Let's see. David.
It's muted.
Oops. David, can you unmute yourself? There we go. There we go.
Oh, hello. Thank you. In fact, this is a surprise. I didn't actually ask to raise a question, but
Sorry.
that's okay. as I'm on, I'd just like sort of maybe some quick opinions on just how important is this in terms of the big picture. How important is this presidential and Senate election in November? I mean, does it feel like perhaps the stakes have never been higher for the courts?
Sorry for calling you out. If you didn't mean to press the raise hand, then thought someone was bold and going for the live question function. But thank you for chiming in there on the spot, David.
That's okay.
Well, I think, people often are saying the stakes have never been higher, but here, every time it's kind of true.
Mm-hmm.
They are, when we know that there's going to likely be a vacancy or vacancies on the Supreme Court. We stand at a moment where there are two very different visions of how the government should function, and some of which have, some of which is just simply a policy question of how do you want the government to be run? You want it bigger or smaller, but some of which does implicate important constitutional questions of separation of powers and how the constitutional structure of the government is supposed to be run. And so it is incredibly important that we have courts who are going to be faithful to the law and to the Constitution at a time like this to make sure that the country continues moving in a constitutional direction.
I guess I would just add that with the Democratic Party drifting to the left and, really giving up any pretense of being for moderation, I think if a Democratic president were to make appointments where they became a majority on the court, you would really see a return to the Warren court because they would really make no bones about their activism. So in that sense, I think the stakes are very high because, it wouldn't be a moderate Democratic court. It would be a Warren Democratic court.
Could be a Sanders type Democratic court. This is the very thing. The stakes really have gotten very extreme on the edges there.
Mike, were you saying something there? No? Okay. Any closing remarks? And it's 2:00, so I think we're about finished here. Thank you all for tuning in. And if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to reach out to me too, and I can forward your emails to them if you're not able to contact them directly. But thank you all for joining, and thank you for participating, Mike and Curt and Carrie.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thanks.
Yeah.